What's going on, everybody? This is James Grandmaster Facts Boyce, and you're here for another episode of FAQs Project. Today, special guest, repeat guest, my man, Brian J. Lambert. Outside of the mythology of Nightfall and Justice, we are here with Wingless Comics to talk about his newest project, Air Force Ones. As you can see on
Thank you for having me, bro.
For sure.
Thank you, man. One, I say it every time. I appreciate being on here. This is my favorite podcast to do. A favorite host. All right. Always, Grandmaster Facts, James Boyce, the man, the myth, the legend. So again, man, I appreciate being here, bro. I love it.
Oh man, look, man, I appreciate you. You know what I'm saying? The biggest thing that I think is that we've had numerous talks about the world of comics, and it's always good to just not even be subjective and to pretty much having an open mind towards the things that you create and what we see around the world of comics. So that's always been like a good thing, even if I'm on the outside looking in.
Which, to be fair, man, and like you said, we've had a lot of conversations. So we've had some behind the scenes conversations. You don't, in my opinion, necessarily need to be on the outside in, man. I've read some of your stuff and it needs to happen, bro. However that takes shape. And I don't say that to many people. You know that. I'll be like, no, you can just keep that to yourself. But I think that I think you've got a very distinct vision from what I read. And I liked where you were headed. You know what I mean? Like I could see, I love to read scripts because I'm more of obviously a reader and a writer. So if I can see and paint that picture in my own head, man, I want to see people do that. And so, like I said, yours was very, very visual and visceral. So I mean, again, off subject, but I'm gonna keep advocating for it, man. I want to see that somewhere in some form or fashion.
Oh man, I appreciate that. But to get right into it and talk about Air Force Ones, I remember a distinct podcast that we did where we were talking about justice and we were talking about other genres that you wanted to take hold. And one happened to be not essentially what you put in this summary, where you talk about how this is basically Gundam meets a different world, but you brought up Robotech.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, okay, kind of on the right track. So,
okay, so let me say, Air Force Ones in its current incarnation is like a little bit different than some things I envisioned, right? But my first mech story was an homage to Robotech, right? Like it was not even just an homage, man. It was like I felt like it was like my pitch to like, man, if I do this really well, then they'll let me write a Robotech movie. My dream has been like the dream project for me, right? Like the thing that like if I get to do it, I can be out the game and be happy. I've always wanted to do a Robotech Macross quadrilogy, right? It's got to be done in 4 movies because Macross is 36 episodes. So you could do 9 episodes worth of content per movie, and it actually breaks up perfectly. Like I already did it in my head. I got the soundtracks, like the whole deal, right? So that was always like, if I get that right, like again, we can cash it all in at that point. I don't have to do anything else creative on a mass scale. That would be the thing. And so I started writing a thing quite a few years ago called Rubicon, and it was mechs, and it was my homage, it was my way of getting in there, kind of. And as I've grown, and obviously I'm still a huge fan of Robotech and Macross and Macross Zero and all these things.
Not to interrupt, but as long as you keep the ass whoopings to the soundtrack of smooth jazz, it's going to be okay.
Bro, right, man. Some people haven't seen like Macross Do You Remember Love, right? Which is the shortened version of the whole deal. But like Rick and Max and Roy just destroying stuff, and you got the saxophone in the back, and then they like right, singing a love song. I choose you. You're like, wait, this is dead. Right. At least the Vietnam soundtracks, it's like war, right? Like that comes up, and you're like, oh, okay, got it, right? But yeah. Fortunate Son, she's talking about love. But also, I love that about. I was on a recent panel. I love that about anime. Their musical cues take themselves far more seriously.
It's true.
Than American musical cues in movies. Like American animation, most of the time is, especially in movies, it's going to be some form of musical or whatever. And anime also lends itself to that, but the way they handle the musicals and the musical cues is different. So that's something I've always like loved. That cinematic. Like there's a movie out called Belle. And it's that same kind of Robotech music style, right?
Yep.
But it's again this dude, this beast is demolishing people as
Yeah.
they have this like lovely soundtrack playing. You know what I mean? So
Yeah, the Neon Genesis does that like right now.
bro, yeah, like it's just I love it, right? Like I don't ever want to get away from that. So when I started doing Air Force Ones, when I got the idea, I was like, man, this is perfect, right? Because it was a way for me to do all my Robotech sensibilities, to lean into some of the socio-political aspects of Gundam and different things. And there are certain little touches that Gundam did that Robotech, Macross did it, but Robotech didn't, right?
Right.
So even to the point of where when you see there are mobile suits everywhere. So in
Mhm.
our world, there are gears everywhere, right? Like people just use them in normal everyday life, and obviously in the military. But when
Yeah.
you see a Gundam for the first time in whatever series it is, some characters like Gundam, and it's a question. They
Yeah.
know it's like, oh, it's that moment of like, oh damn, we got a Gundam in here, like
Yeah.
it's crazy, right? And so I wanted that same thing. So when I was creating it, it was like Mad Gear, like I want that, right? Somebody's going to say
Right.
that line that's with the same gravity. And so it's those little touches that I was able to kind of glean from Gundam and again match my love of Robotech so that we can get this kind of far-reaching story going without ripping off either one, right? Because a mobile suit and a big robot is great. Robotech is very specific in Veritech. Well, the one I come from, right? I'm talking about just the Macross
Yeah.
Saga. You got transforming Veritechs, transforming planes. I didn't want to do that. I didn't want to do transforming cars or tanks, right?
Right.
Because then you lend yourself to Transformers and some other things. But I feel like if you do doing robots, right, doing giant robots, fighting robots, and having a very cultural, black cultural aesthetic to the sound, the look, and the mood
Yeah.
was something that was necessary and something that I wanted to see personally.
Dope. Now talk about this because you're bringing up two factions. You're bringing up Lower Earth and the floating islands of Elysia in correspondence with their conflict with the Exodus War.
Mhm.
The floating islands of Elysia, I was thinking of the comparisons. I was like, okay, Pandora, Avatar, Utopia from the X-Men, the floating meteor, New Asgard. But then
Mhm.
I was like, wait a minute, Neil Blomkamp, Elysium.
Right, right.
And it's funny that they're
Very
called Elysia.
right. No, very, very well. One, if I would act like I had, oh, I've never seen that movie. I don't know what you're talking about, right? Like that's stupid. Of course. And I loved it, right? And I also feel like it was very poignant in terms of when we're talking about these things, right? We're talking about socio-political matters.
Yeah,
If the 1% could raise islands right now,
yeah,
right? And these islands floated over the poor people, they 100% would, and they would 100% get all their people up there, right?
uh-huh,
Like that's a real a sentiment and fact, right? Like
yeah.
so
That's like the
um
Elon preparing the spaceships to get everybody to Mars, leaving all us broke motherfuckers down here.
exactly, right? And so it just made a lot of sense. And I know that there's a lot of mech kind of influence stuff in Elysium. But also Elysia, in terms of mythology, what it represents, right? The promised land and all these good things, and
Yeah,
heaven on earth and blah 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 blah. So I thought that was important, and I also think that there's a mythological base that I feel like is important,
yeah,
right? Because especially in our common society, some of these mythologies are raised above others,
yeah.
right? You talk about Norse mythology, and they're like, oh, it's great, or even Egyptian mythology, and they get these levels that are a little bit higher, Greek mythology, and you're going to see some of that play into
Yeah.
even how the mechs are named, uh, and how again
Yep.
Elysia is comprised of all these other things. So there was a very big cultural introspection piece for me
Yeah.
in terms of how I'm playing the duality of what's good, what's bad, how how things are perceived, right? Like again, Elysia is it's heaven on earth, so it's got to be great, right?
Right.
Or is it? Right? Like, what's the next step?
It's
What's the
funny how
next thing?
yeah, it's funny how all these heaven on earth utopia type places always have like the most fearsome army you've ever seen in your life.
Right,
Like an
right,
empire.
right, right, right. So it's impossible. Humans are humans, man. So
Mhm.
you give someone peace or prosperity or whatever you want to call it, that's never good enough because it's not really gained. It's not really earned.
Mhm.
If you're saying, hey, I'm gonna give you this utopian society, a utopian society comes with rules, right?
Yeah.
And so people at one point or another, I love Demolition Man for that, right? Like
Oh yeah.
at one point or another, people are not going to want to follow those rules. People are not going to want to do this thing. And so I think the duality of a utopian society is very engaging. And I think it's very engaging based upon a utopian society that is oppressing another society, which has historically been the case, right? You England, when they, you know what I mean, like the Huns, like on and on and on
Every empire fell.
right, right, and it's and when you're in it or when it's part of it, oh, it's the greatest place ever. It's heaven. Oh, we want to again, we want to be everybody wanted to be a Roman, everybody wanted to be Greek, right? But in order to be those places, they had to kill a bunch of people, they had to do a
Yeah.
bunch of stuff, and they had to keep a bunch of people down. Um, and no one's excluded from that. No empire is excluded from that. So I think it's fun. It's fun to play with. It's fun to kind of toy with what we hold as something that's dope. Again,
Yeah.
we look back, and especially in modern Black culture, right? You have a lot of people that love Egyptian mythology, myself included, right? Because we
Man,
feel like a sort of a connection to it. We get, talk about it a lot. But even Egypt and what it did, a bunch of people
brutal.
died, man. Yeah, like it was harsh. So, but we still uphold that like later on in life. So, again, I love playing with that, right? And I'm playing with it in a sense of being outside of it, right? I'm not doing a historical fiction. I'm
Yeah,
doing something that doesn't necessarily exist
this is true.
outside of what I'm creating.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm looking at it, of course, with the correspondence of Gundam, of course, is the one thing that stands out. When the people like see this for the very first time, it's like, okay, Gundams, mechs, that looks awesome on film. But you also provide this
Mhm.
different aspect to be like, okay, a different world.
Yeah,
Black American culture meets West Coast culture.
yeah.
What does that fit in?
So there are a couple things, and again, this is without spoilers, right?
Hmm?
So if you read through the Kickstarter, you'll see that like our main heroes are from like the Seventh Ward, right? So in my mind, you have Elysium that's up top, and then the world gets broken into wards, right?
Yep.
Not unlike Gundam, where they have their specific little places, right? Dort 1
Correct.
and Dort 11 or whatever, same kind of concept. And so the wards. So again, I'm a very West Coast guy, so there's going to be a time, you have to imagine there's going to be a time where they have to venture out of their ward. So what
Mm.
happens then? They go to Ward 9. Hey, we don't like Seventh Ward. It's over here, bro. You know what I mean? Like, so where are you from? Hey, we Seventh Ward. You know what I mean? Like, there are a lot of those little
Right.
nuanced parts. And when two things happened that were really, really influential in this, as I was getting really the ideas going and really getting the story going, the handshake was really important to me, right? And so it came to me
Man.
one day. I was like, "Hey, man, if they do the handshake, that's fire, right? Like, it's the real, like, again, that's a Black cultural thing. We do this, right? We've been doing this for
Yeah.
however long." And so I got a buddy from New Orleans, and obviously I got my people from like LA, right? And so
Yep.
one of my buddies, I met my buddy from New Orleans when I was getting the animation done, right? So I was like, hey man, I need you to do this handshake with me to like so we can take pictures of it. And I realized that the way you shake hands from a New Orleans dude is different from an LA dude. It's the same motions, right? But it's not the same flow.
Right.
So so we took the pictures and it looked good, right? But like the flow was off. Like if I filmed it, the flow was off.
Yeah.
So I was like maybe a week later, my buddy from Cali, we met up just on some regular stuff. And all I did was tell him, hey man, the handshake, it looks like this, right? And as we go, he was like, oh, let's try it. He was like, I want to do it, right? He was hyped up about it. Okay, cool. So we did it and it flowed because we both Cali dudes, you know what I mean? We both
Mhm.
LA dudes. And so it's like, it's just those little nuanced parts. It's like when somebody comes out, you get an Aquafina or somebody who's got a black scent, right?
Oh,
And it sounds like not your average Black person, but it's the Black scent all sounds the same from a bunch of different people, right? And
oh
they're
yeah.
like, oh, it's because I grew around Black people in New
Right.
York. But why does the New York one sound like the Atlanta one sound like the LA one? What I delved into was the nuance and the difference between Black culture across the nation, right?
Regionally.
That's language, that's
Yeah.
flow, that's word usage. We all understand each other, right?
Yep.
But it really is a bunch of different dialects from a bunch of different places and a bunch of different movements can all coalesce and we can all get along, but it's different. And so I wanted this to be in some levels intrinsically LA, right? Intrinsically Southern California, as well as being Black. Down to one of the first places you see Nas is the Coliseum. Yeah, it's destroyed, but the LA Coliseum it's the LA Coliseum.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like so that kind of stuff to me, it's important, and it's important so that people know that we're not a monolith, right? Like we are Black Americans, right? Like that's one thing, but
Mhm.
we have different minds within that. We have different movements within that. I can't go and step again. I can't show up at Fat Tuesday and step like somebody from New Orleans. I may do my version, right? But it's not the same.
Mm-hmm.
Somebody who sea walks and they from LA it's a different sea walk than New York. It's a different sea walk than Atlanta. It's a
Mm-hmm.
different, you know what I mean? Than
Yeah,
Chicago, whatever. Um, so I think those little things are important, and they just add to the story and to the characters and to the overall world, which I think is also another important part of building. I've gone from wanting to see myself in a fantasy world to building fantasy worlds that are based on our culture,
right.
based on my culture, right? I don't need to just transplant myself into Tolkien's world. I will, don't get it twisted, because I love that too.
Of
But
course.
when we're talking about building something new, I want to build something that's based around our culture, my culture, and other people have to come to it, right? They have to come to understand. I get to open the door to say, hey, this is a piece. Or hey, no, you're not welcome to this piece. Your level of understanding, your level of immersion in my culture does not prepare you to understand this specific thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, when you're looking at the characters that you basically created for this, whether it was Nas, Maui, Sky, the Commander, Admiral Kane, they all have gone through an immense amount of conflict, and you can
Mm-hmm,
visibly see what conflict has done to them. You know, like was it
mm-hmm.
Nas lost an arm? Maui,
Yeah.
of course, has gone through the shit that he went through because he lost a brother. Sky was basically being protected to the point where her brother basically the reason he lost his arm is because he was protecting her. And
Yeah.
so, like you talk about this one series inside of the entire book called the Pantheon Games, but you don't talk about
Mm-hmm.
what happened there. You talk about basically the visible scars of what happened due to that conflict. I mean, is there any was that the precursor to all of this?
Yeah, yeah. So, well, not directly, and yes, directly. There have been a number of things since the Exodus War that have happened, right? But their hallmark moment is the Pantheon Games, right? Like their hallmark moment of like going from, yeah, we're poor and this society sucks to war is hell, and really understanding it on a personal and visceral level, which changes everything. The commander and Admiral Kane are slightly different because they grew up in the war machine. They're part of the war machine.
Mm-hmm.
But Nas, Maui, and Sky, it hits home, right? Like that's when no one is safe. And yeah, they still have to, regardless of all that, they've still got to carry on. They've still got to do things. And so the Pantheon Games attack is really, it depends on, it's one of those perception things for me. And I
Right.
want to do that. I want to hit that duality because if you're from Elysia, that's a military action, right? That they needed to do in order to preserve peace. But
Mm-hmm.
if you're on lower earth, that's a terrorist act from an oppressive government, right? And so I think
Right.
that those things are important when we look at modern day takes on superheroes, on genres, on sci-fi, whatever it is, right? Because you get things where like people, people, you know, the thin blue line and all these other things, right? Protect the blue and blah blah blah. So that means in Star Wars, you would have been an Imperial,
Yeah.
right? But like you, that same person goes around is like, oh, I love the rebellion and Luke Skywalker. Those are the you see how
Yeah.
and sometimes people don't get it. Like they're technically terrorists, but they're not, right? Because we're
Right.
looking at it a certain way, and they're freedom fighters, and they freed everybody. But the installed legal, lawful government is what they overthrew to do that. So again, who's right? And I think that we get into a lot of that gray area of perception being the thing. Again, one man's freedom fighter is another man's terrorist, and that has far-reaching like consequences. And I think that there are a lot of ideas that we can explore within that.
Mm-hmm.
There's a whole section of the world or people that would say the BLM protests. There's another section that'll call them the riots, the BLM riots, right? There's a whole section of people that say the insurrection on January 6th. And then the other people are like, it wasn't an insurrection. It was just us hanging out, like, which is bullshit, but okay. You know what I mean? Like, there's a reason you guys got arrested
I ain't
and
never
got
broke a
charges.
window just hanging out.
Right, right, right. Right. If the Secret Service tells you don't break that window, don't come through, and then you get shot coming through, you're not a hero.
No.
You're not a martyr. You're a criminal.
Yeah.
Guys, that's how it works. But yeah, again, it's one of those things, right? People care more about the targets that got broke into. That Target said, we don't care about them damn targets,
Yeah.
than people breaking into the Capitol building.
Mm-hmm.
Like, come on now.
And even from the aspect, all right, I wanted to find out because you know you talk about the 7-4 and you talk about the poverty that basically they face, and you even brought up Star Wars where the the Empire's industrial complex, of course, is funded everything that they build. So their ships, their weapons, their weaponizing systems, their propaganda, so on and so forth. The lower Earth having the ability to have mechs, to have Gundams at their whim. Where does this all come from? Because everybody always had that notation of in Star Wars, we're like, how did the rebels build all this shit?
Yeah. So, okay, none of this is spoil. I had to think, like, am I
Huh?
going to spoil something? But I say in there that they stumble across the mechs, and they literally do, right? So,
Uh-huh.
um, there also I say in there that the Exodus War, the end of the Exodus War, is kind of shrouded in mystery, right? Like, no one who's living now really knows what happened at the end of the Exodus War. They just
Mhm.
know that Alicia won. So that being the case, like I said, they stumble upon these legendary mad gear. So they're on Earth. Does that mean that they are? If you look through the pages, there's a page where you see the Yasuke for the first time,
Yeah.
even on the pages there, right? And it's got some battle damage on there, and on and on and on. So these are relics. That's why they're legendary mad gear. They're not new, and they're not something that's like necessarily like in function at the moment.
Mhm.
And they're certainly not um, lower Earth's gear that they use in order for construction or whatever else. They're not military grade. This is the first time in however long that lower Earth gets to see something that's military grade, and that changes the dynamic. There's also a line in there. I'm not sure if you caught it, or and there are a couple people who have asked me because they didn't catch it, uh, where they start using the strike model gears.
Mm.
Alicia goes away from the legendary mad gear and goes into the strike model, which is faster to produce, smaller but effective. Right,
Right.
numbers over quality, quantity over quality. And so again, some of those dynamics is what makes for an interesting kind of dichotomy and an interesting segue into the war, into a new version of this war.
Yep, and even also from that aspect, I mean, just aside, you could tell your inspiration and a lot of people's inspiration for the way you name the Gundams. Of course, Yasuke,
Yeah,
Ogun,
yeah,
Katsuni. You know, this is what we grew up on. So
right.
the fact that you were able to name these mechs and for those to be caught out there, of course, the commander has Gilgamesh, which is the God Killer, and I was like, oh,
Yeah.
see now. Oh man, these inspirational influences, whether it's been anything throughout popular culture and how we've been able to uh not necessarily twist the story or manipulate the story, but create it within ourselves and what we grew up on and how we grew up. You know, this was stable popular culture with us back in the 80s, early
Mhm.
90s and everything like that. So I can imagine how your head started spinning creating this 70 plus page novel.
Yeah, it was actually pretty awesome. Like, so even the commander himself has gone through, well, his mech has gone through a couple name changes, right? And you
Mhm.
try to get the thing that fits the most. Because at first he was like the Kratos, right?
Mhm.
Obvious, right? The God Killer.
Yeah.
But then I was like, that's too close, right? Like I'm literally just pilfering something, right? And I love mythology. And I think that there, again, like I've said, there are a lot of mythological like pantheons
Yeah.
that don't get the props that, like, man, this story is dope. Like if you read the story of Gilgamesh, it's crazy, but it's
Bro,
fun and it's
even in
awesome.
the Eternals, like the Gilgamesh from the
Right.
Eternals is nuts.
Yeah. Right. Right. And so there are a lot of times where they just kind of get shied over and stuff. And look, that doesn't mean that there's not going to be a Zeus and an Anubis and an Odin or whatever, right? Like,
Mhm.
because these are all great mythologies, but I wanted to kind of do some different things, and they have their name, and then they have their like moniker after that, right? Like it's
Right.
the Yasuke, and then it's like the Black Wolf. There's going to be a reason, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a little bit more that I'm adding to each little piece. I also think, and this is a very true sentiment. I had really, really high hopes for the Yasuke anime that came out a couple years ago,
Same.
and it did not deliver on any of those hopes for the reason that it was just a journey into the West again.
Yeah.
The story was just Journey into the West, and not that I don't like it, but I had just seen it a bunch of different times. And I just think that the Romance of the Three Kingdoms stuff bro, they've been making games on that for 20 years, the same game over and over and over again, right? And
You
it's
just
great
basically
every single
made
time.
a Black Last Samurai. That's what you made.
Yeah, yeah. And I don't even I like Last Samurai better. Don't get me started. You know, I
Oh.
just look, you have the superpowered child that we don't know why, and then that's
Mhm.
the thing that you got to protect in order to do some stuff. And just in okay, I thought one part was very, very, very insane to me. People didn't like that there were mechs in there. I didn't care. I thought it was cool. I love mechs. Throw a mech in anything. What I hated though was that they saw this lady turn into like, did she turn into a bear? I think she
It,
transmogged into a bear. But then when he showed up because he had black skin, they were like, "Black man? What?" I was like, "Bro, she turned into a bear."
there's
So people
Transformers
turning
out
into
here.
bears. Yeah, right. Like that's not surprising. But a dude with black skin is surprising. Like so, it just I don't want to say I want to correct that because those are choices that people
Yeah.
make, and that's to me that's fine. You got to do what you got to do.
That was like the
Um,
first episode, by
I
the
just,
way.
bro, I was so out of it by then. Like I was so outdone.
Yeah.
But I wanted to do something that kind of, I don't know, talked about that legacy, talked about that. Again, this is Yasuke is not a mythological character. He's like a dude that really
That's
existed.
a real
So
person.
if people, right, if people dive into that lore and dive into his story because they look up the name or something, I think that that's dope. Also, it's a dope way for me to tell you off the rip. I don't have to do a bunch of building. This dude is in the Yasuke. You know he's going to be a problem. That's
Yeah.
it. I don't have to do much more than that. Everybody knows Kitsune. Everybody knows the Nine Tails at this point. Again, that's a really dope piece of mythology. People are starting to get on Ogun, right? And some of the Yoruba mythology and some of the
Mhm.
Yoruba gods and stuff. So again, I think that's just a very easy kind of segue and something that we've seen in a lot of anime where they have these names and these things, and it's not until you go back and look it up and you're like, oh, that had more significance
Yep.
than what I thought. And so, it wasn't until I was watching like Fire Force and Naruto at the same time, and I see they had the same names, and I was like, "This means something. Let
Right.
me go look it up." And then I got the deeper meanings. And so, again, that's just been. I want to create that same kind of thing.
Mhm.
I've been talking really a lot about cultural exchange, and I think in a lot of levels, in a lot of ways, Black American culture gets kind of siphoned,
Yeah.
and we don't
And
necessarily siphon
injected
that
into other
back.
shit.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And we don't get that back, right? Like we
Mhm.
can have Samurai Champloo or we can have Cowboy Bebop, again, jazz,
Yeah.
Robotech like we're talking about, even though it's like it was like that Asian 80s jazz, that was still taken from American jazz, which is black
Yeah.
people, right? And transplanted and they get to do that. And we haven't necessarily done the same in terms of, okay, I want to take anime, but I want to base it on my culture. So then again, you have to come over here to understand as
Mhm.
opposed to me always going over there to understand.
Right. Right.
Um,
And you
I
even
just think that's really
provided,
important.
yeah, you even provided a wild card, by the way, because the last, I guess, the character that kind of like brings everything together, Princess Bahati.
Yes, yes. And so, again, it's not spoilerific, but if you've watched any Gundam series,
Mhm.
it's about one guy on the good guy side that's a dope ass pilot, right?
Yep.
It's about another guy on the bad guy side that's also a dope ass pilot, but he's got some issues, right?
Mhm.
Whether you know what they are, but he's got some issues. Okay. You have a princess that somehow goes missing or is not in the place that she's supposed to be,
This is true.
which links up to that first guy.
She's
He's got
always
to do
undercover,
something.
doing some
Right,
rogue
right,
mission.
right. He's got his best friend that's always got his back and is like, we shouldn't be doing this, but I got you.
I got
And
you.
you got the background of a war, right?
Mhm.
And so, and what is war, right? War is old men sending young men to their death. So then you got Admiral Kane, and like you said, all of this stuff wraps itself into itself. And I also think that those are story mechanics that are important to the genre,
Mhm.
to the mech manga genre. I think that those people will call them tropes, right? But I feel
Yeah.
like it's only a trope if you do it incorrectly. I think that those are story mechanics that are important to these stories, and you can explore socioeconomic, you can explore political, you can explore um, child soldiers and all these other things using those mechanics. So I wanted to make sure that I paid the respect to what's come before me. Right? I paid the respect. Look, Minmay is a princess too.
Yeah.
No, she's not called a princess, but come on now. Anybody who's watched Macross or watched Robotech, she's the princess character.
Mhm.
Yeah, he ends up with Lisa, right? But that's again, the archetype is there.
Right.
right? You still have the old and the new, and you Chiron and Rick. Those are the two. Chiron's got
Mhm.
problems. Rick is the badass pilot, right?
Yep.
Roy, you know what I mean? So you have all of those things. And so I think it was important for me to use those mechanics to tell a story that's new and fresh and from a perspective it hasn't been. I see a lot of anime and a lot of more manga from Black creators, right?
You do.
And it really is just the palette swaps sometimes, a lot of times. The story mechanics aren't there. Like it means they've watched it and they've seen a lot of things, but I wasn't gonna name my Black character that's supposed to be from Lower Earth. He's not gonna be called, Toshinori. It doesn't make sense, right? It's not culturally relevant. It's not a
True.
story I can tell. That's someone else's story to tell.
Hmm.
So you can take those mechanics and make it intrinsically yours, and that's the part I wanted to do. I don't. There's no one who can come in and say, even just from the Kickstarter, even just from the preview images we've seen, there's no one that could come in and be like, oh, that's just a palette swap. That's just you just race bent
Yeah.
Rick Hunter. You just race bent, Amaro, Ray. No,
No.
100%. Like, is it the same genre as both of those? Yes. But is it its own story? Is it its own living, breathing history and character development and all of that stuff? Yeah, 100%.
Word.
And that's important to me.
That being around from when you started Nightfall, started Justice, had the intricacies to, of course, embolden a lot of your other creators to pick up her, and like just doing what you're doing. This has to be the most intricate Kickstarter because the show is showcasing. Of course, you spent a portion of it, maybe around like 5 years, 5, 6 years, putting
Mhm.
together a universe within Nightfall and the beginning of Wingless Comics. And then
Mhm.
it's always good, especially from a reader standpoint, from an author standpoint, be like, okay, I know he can do that. I know he or she can do that. But necessarily it's okay to be like, what else can they do? So this is like
Mhm.
this of course take it, you still have elements of mythology in there, which I know that you can write like in into the ether, you know. So
Appreciate you, bro.
so when you come up with something like this, and it's almost like the dynamic of it, because I know that it's been a year,
Mhm.
you've been out for a while. So I realize now that you've
Mhm.
taken grasp on the lore and
Mhm.
have showcased that now, like you're ready for bigger acts. So not only are you taking into account that, yeah, I have a 70-page graphic novel, but I also, even though I've dabbled with animation before in the past, I'm going to give you an animation with this.
Yeah. So, um, man. So we released, or well, we ran the Kickstarter for Justice kind of late last year.
Yeah.
Oh no, around the same time we did May, right? But man, we had so many production delays. And this is the reality of it, right? Like this is the behind the
Mhm.
scenes stuff. And it's cool. Look, I do Justice once a year every year. We were thinking about doing twice a year, but again, because of projects like this,
Yep.
that I don't know that it's going to be feasible, right? Until I have my own complete underwritten publishing house. But that's neither here nor there. So as we the idea came around the same time that I was launching Justice, or a little bit before. So I had to sit on it for a long time. I had to sit on it for about 6 months before I could release anything last year in November, teaser images and what's going to happen and what we're going to do.
Yeah.
And I am fortunate, also maybe crazy or maybe ambitious, in that I'm able to continue to write Justice. Justice number 5 is right around the corner. Justice number 5 / Caliburn number 2 is still hitting in May.
Yeah.
We're still working on that. We still got the art is actually coming back from Fabio. I got 2 pieces yesterday, so that train doesn't stop. In addition to the editing and other things I do, the publishing part of it, that's the business side of it. The creative side of it is I like to be able to stretch my creative muscles. And I mean that in terms of, why be independent if I only do what somebody else tells me I can do?
Hmm.
Right? Like, why be independent if I can't say, I do want to see this animated? So I'm going to either save up the money or I'm going to generate the money to work with this animator who I've admired for X amount of time.
Yep.
Right. And we're going to get something going here. I'm going to work with this, this toy guy that I've known for X amount of time, and we're going to get this stuff articulated. I feel like the sky's the limit in a lot of ways. And we need to work in a fashion that shows that. And that's what I want to do. I do think that it's folly for writers, creators sometimes to go in. We've talked about it before. I got 100 characters in my universe and 1,000 different. No one cares, right? No one cares when you first come
Mm-mm.
out. They want to see the one thing, and they want it to be really good, and they want you to grow upon that, right?
Yep.
And I feel like if you can do that and be successful generating money, because you need to generate money in order to continue to do things, if you can be successful and generate money doing that, then you need to be able to do it on the other side as well, right? Be successful with your next project
Mm-hmm.
and generate the money. And that's what this is, right? This is a passion project for me. But if it hadn't funded, it wouldn't have funded. I
Yeah.
mean, it's me, so I still would have put it out at some
Mm-hmm.
point, right? But it wouldn't be the same. And so again, I'm fortunate that we now, what's gonna launch, we're gonna have the Wingless Gold label, which
Mm-hmm.
is our Nightfall, Justice, Her, Immortalis, like all of that, right? Like that's the gold label. That's our original American comics.
Then you have the
And
black.
the black label is going to be the manga stuff,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so that's the next kind of piece. That's the next uh evolution of how we're going to put this material out. For the moment, I see Air Force Ones being maybe 4 volumes.
Okay.
Obviously, the volumes will grow in size. I think 70 pages will probably be the shortest of the volumes. Um, but I have a kind of a 4-part story. Like I said, it's really based on my idea and my pitch and what I wanted to do for Robotech being a 4 movie series, and so
Yep.
I'm able to, again, through support from people like you, right? Through support, and I mean that in like the general, like the genuine way of like, if I'm not on podcasts, if you're not interested, then other people aren't interested.
Mm-hmm.
If these things don't happen, I wouldn't be able to do what I do. But I'm fortunate enough to have that. I'm fortunate enough to come on here and you and I have a good conversation.
Of
You
course.
didn't just come in like, hey, what's Air Force Ones? I'm like, well, it's kind of cool. You know what I mean? Like, I'm fortunate enough to be able to like have this back and forth and talk character and talk what we're doing, and it gets people engaged. And so that is a huge part of it. That's a huge part of everything that goes into
Of course.
creating these things. And I just don't want to be, look, like I said, I love Justice and I love Caliburn and I love all of the Wingless Gold label characters and properties. Otherwise, I wouldn't work with them. That doesn't mean that I don't have other loves, right? Like I've wanted to do a robot story all my life, so here's my chance.
Right.
And there are going to be others. This is not going to be the only Wingless Black Label title. I have at least 2 more coming um, in the near future, and I mean I don't have to be coy about them. Black Power Rangers, man. You'll see a Black Sentai manga
I
coming from me
I kind of
sometime soon.
figured that if you were going into Gundam, you were going to do Takahatsu type stuff next.
I feel like I feel like if you love one, you love the other 9 times out of
Two.
10, right? And so at least a one shot, at least, you know what I mean, to get one good story out. And I have another one that I will kind of keep under wraps, but that one's going to be, yeah, again, man, I just like kind of twisting the genres, right? I like mixing, athletics with mysticism and, again, Gundams with music, right?
Yeah.
And those kinds of things. And so, again, as we push forward, I think that as Black creativity, right? Let me say this correctly. As Black American creativity, because Black creativity can encompass so many things
Oh yeah.
and it is so vast, right? But I mean specifically in this niche, as Black American creativity kind of proliferates the market and proliferates the zeitgeist of society in general, right? Like we run the world with rap and then on and on and on, right? Because these things started with the Black American community, and I feel like as we have like not a stranglehold, but while we have a hold on the gaze of people, I think it's our responsibility to expand that gaze,
Mm-hmm.
right? And to expand what we talk about and to expand the ideas so that we are not pigeonholed into creators that kind of front the machine
Yeah,
and are never part of the machine.
it's true. You'll find of course a lot of creators that kind of like you could see that their overall aspect of how they view popular culture is one dimensional. And
Hmm.
it was like, okay, well, what are your other aspirations? What are your other inspirations? It's like
Hmm.
collectively, we want to see from a comic standpoint. The the person that I've seen that can create Shadow Man for Image Comics can also get together and write an Iron Man comic if they wanted to. Like they've always
Hmm.
had those type of aspirations, or better yet, even outside of that realm, outside of the capes and cows, they can give you a crime noir drama if they wanted to, because that's something that they've always wanted to do. So
Hmm.
from our standpoint, from a Black American standpoint, it's almost like I can do so much. You know how much time
Yeah.
I stood sitting Indian style in front of a TV because I was told to, and I just sit
Right.
there for 5 hours flipping
Right.
channels. Like I
Right.
do so much. It's a variety of shit, and I could tell you stories about all of it if I wanted to.
Right. Right. Right.
Yeah,
Right. We definitely do sometimes stick to only one type of thing, right? Like, you know, ultimately, like I want to do a cowboy heist movie or a cowboy heist script, right? Because you don't see that. I want to do Ocean's 11, you know what I mean, as a cowboy adventure, but we don't get that, right? What we'll get normally is we'll get a New Jack City, we'll get a Power, we'll get a Raising
sure.
Canaan, and those aren't bad. I'm not saying that, but we get stuck on only that, and sometimes even as an audience. We like those kinds of things, but we don't just like them because it's about drugs. We like it because it's a story of survival. We
Yeah,
like it because it's a story of overcoming. We
it's
like
because
it
I
because
seen
all
that
these
before.
other right, all these other nuanced things. And it's like, well, we can apply all of those story elements to a completely different genre and it'll be just as dope. And again, I think it's kind of our responsibility to kind of break through that and break into that, right? But in a way that still leads us to having ownership of those ideas. I think that I saw a TikTok the other day and it didn't make me mad, but maybe it did. It was like it was a bunch of different clips of like Japanese schools, not like primary schools, but like dance schools,
Yeah.
teaching people how to crip walk, right? And it made me mad from the standpoint of like the dress style, right? Because this was like their promo video. But it
Mhm.
was like, man, they had people dressing like essays, they had people
Yeah.
dressing like gangsters, they had yeah, on
They're
and
wearing
again, that's
Chuck.
like the nuance of
They're
not
wearing
yeah,
Dickies.
they didn't know the culture, right? Like those guys who would dress like this way wouldn't do that, but these guys would, right? Like, and
Right.
if you're from these places, we know the difference in that. And so when I talk about cultural exchange, it's one of those things. That piece has been exchanged, right? Like that piece that they are using has been exchanged. They've taken the music, they've taken the dress, the moves there, right? But the cultural part of it is not significant necessarily, or not significant enough for it to be noticed in another place.
Hmm.
Whereas when we watch anime, again, we're going to know Naruto, we're going to know these things that happen, right? We have to, when we consume that, we have to understand all these little nuanced parts. And while I'm not saying that they're equal by any stretch of the imagination, you wouldn't see a black person doing geisha, right?
No.
Because it's culturally significant to them.
Right.
And people have lost that certain things that we do because it's become commercialized. Look, Fat Joe said it years ago, like, you know what I'm saying? Even what was he even B2K doing the crip walk, right? Like
Yeah.
because it's become commercialized as
Hmm.
opposed to part of the original culture that it was part
Right.
of.
And that's usually like I can't say it's the downfall of it, but it always regresses the culture of it
Mm-hmm.
because
Mm-hmm.
I remember a time where, when hip hop was just getting started, all of a sudden it ended up in McDonald's commercials. And then
Right.
they were breakdancing on the tables at the McDonald's and everything. And I'm like, okay,
Right.
this is not what it's supposed to be.
Right, man. I see it sometimes with my fiance, man. We'll talk about it now, and like an older school song will come on. I'm like, they hated that song. Like
They
it was
absolutely
get
hated that
this out
song.
of everywhere. Like, and so I mean, and that goes back generations, right? People talk about Motown now like it was all great, but Motown was black.
Mhm.
There's a reason Pat Boone has a career because he was singing Motown songs
Oh
in a
yeah.
different kind of way so that people could digest it. But now it's like, oh, everybody loved Motown. No, that's not the case. Like
Uh-huh.
everybody didn't own Motown, and that's how we lose things. Like we lose country. That's how we lose jazz. That's how we lose rock and roll. That's how we lose all these genres that we really created because it becomes socially popular. And it's look, this is how we lose R&B.
Mhm.
Pop music didn't exist X amount of time ago,
True.
and when pop was a category in award shows. It was basically like, hey, this black R&B artist sold so much that they crossed over. So now we're calling it pop. It's just popular music, whatever's popular.
Or
And
they
then pop
didn't.
became its own genre,
Yeah.
right? And you know what I mean? Like you have NSYNC singing again. And I like NSYNC, don't get me wrong. JC Chazé got pipes. I'll never say anything else, right? But are they doing sanitized R&B music, which
Yes.
has now become pop?
Yeah.
Yes, which then turns into K-pop, which is now keep K-pop Korean.
Yeah.
We don't want
Now
black people
K-pop.
singing K-pop. Wait,
Right.
what?
Yeah, because
Like track this all
people are
back. It's all R&B, bro.
yeah, people are thinking that K-pop came from NSYNC and Backstreet Boys. I was like, you might want to pull that back a little bit.
Right, right. Even new
So
New Kids
addition,
on the Block. They'll be like, hey, we got it from New Edition. Like I don't know what
yeah,
y'all talking
they'll tell
about. Like
you.
exactly. Right, right,
Like
right. And so
we're
that's one of
both
those.
from Boston. I can't say that I did this on my own.
Right, right, right. And that so rarely happens. And again, that's how we lose control, not control, right? But we lose the cultural significance of certain things when it happens. We lose the cultural significance of rap,
Yeah.
right? Rap has become so commercialized. Again, you'll see it happening everywhere. And it's like, oh, now everybody owns rap, which is not to say that people cannot function in that genre, not being a part of that culture. But the question of cultural appropriation comes when Jason Kelsey invented the fade. What? We've been having fade for 70, years. As long as there have been barbers, we didn't have fades. But
That,
just because other people jumped on it now, right? Now
right.
it's they invented it. It's the same thing with the Kardashians. That's what makes it cultural appropriation because Black Americans and Black people, again, across the diaspora, rarely get credit for the things that we have been
True.
doing. And then somebody not of our hue does it. And it's like, oh, see what they invented? They didn't invent anything.
Anything.
So again, for me, when I talk about cultural exchange, that part is important. I realize that America, and especially Black Americans, did not create Gundams, did not create giant mech battles. I know where it comes from, right? And so I'm going to give them all their due respect and all their props for it. But just like they took rap beats in order to do Samurai Champloo, because otherwise, if we're being realistic, Samurai Champloo wouldn't get the acclaim that it does.
Right.
It's an amazing show. Period. It's an amazing
The
show, but it
score
wouldn't get
set
the
the
acclaim
bar.
that it does without exactly. So we need to do the same thing. So we, in my opinion, right, and that's why I'm doing this the way I'm doing this. I need to be able to set the bar in terms of storytelling mechanics, and as we move into animation and get funded and on and on and on,
Hmm.
then I can set that musical score the way that it should be, right, from our cultural perspective, just like the story is told from our cultural perspective.
Word.
Those things are important, and those things are, I think, that we need to kind of move forward in championing as opposed to just being like, oh, I want to get in here and I want to tell a superhero story. That's like every other superhero story. Somebody got powers and from magic. No, man, I want it to be grounded in and why we do it,
Right.
and again, taking ownership of that cultural exchange and that cultural dynamic.
Dope, man. Yo, now it was you got about like I'm gonna say what, like 2 weeks left in the campaign?
Yeah, yeah, we still got 2 weeks left, man. Yeah, yeah, we got all the time in the world. It won't end until technically next Saturday, because even though it's 2 weeks, the way Kickstarter
Yeah. And
measures time is weird.
the biggest thing is I love how the community is reacting to it. The indie comic community is
Yeah,
reacting
yeah.
to it because like it seems like I remember I was just I normally like when I check out a Kickstarter I just like I'll look at the comments and everything and then I'm looking at
Mhm.
like Michael Watson, Sean Mack. I'm like, well, goddamn. I'm like, all right.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
it's good to see that even outside of 2018 and how immersed we were in 2020, that the indie comics
Mhm.
community is still a bonding element to everything we
Yeah,
put.
it's been. I was there. There was a part of me, obviously, that was hugely concerned. Right,
Oh yeah,
racism proliferates in these social media spaces. Right, so I knew Black people in Gundams. Man, I may have a. Ooh, it may
you
be
might be
rough.
having time on your hands.
But right, right, right. So one, I've been fortunate that that wasn't the case. I have not had that. I can say 99, legitimately 99% of all feedback I've got has been great. Has been glorious.
Hmm.
Right. So that's one part of it that's been awesome. But then I've also had these guys, like you said, Sean Mack, Mike Watson, Concept Moon Studios, Subsume, just 133 Art, Greg Anderson, Elise, like all these people that are always in conversations. And yeah, I'm talking to these guys. I know a lot
Yeah,
of them, like legitimately. We were down in San Diego, all of us hanging out, like, but just to have that outward support is really great, right? And for people to validate, like, not, hey man, this project is fire, right? So
yeah,
even when this project first started, I had sent a text to some people I was formerly really close with. We ain't so close no more.
mhm,
But middle of the night, I got the idea, shit. So I made sure I wrote it down. And I shot him a text in the morning, like, hey, go with me, bro. Air Force Ones, but they mech pilots. And I was geeked about it. Like, come on now, y'all know me. This should be
mhm.
fire. Crickets. And so it made me really doubt. Like, I was like, oh, well, maybe it's not like a
Mhm.
dope idea. Maybe it's stupid. And I waited a little while, and I hit a guy, Robert Jeffrey, who writes for 133
Run
Art. He
through the
wrote,
art.
yeah, yeah. So he does, again, he writes for a ton of people, but um, so we're talking, man, and I was like, hey, man, I got an idea I got to run past you. Like, tell me what you think. And I said the same thing to him, and he kind of chuckled. He was like, "I like that." And then he, we were okay, cool. And then he hit me back like maybe 20 minutes later. He was like, "Hey, man, don't tell nobody about this." And I
Yeah.
was like, "What?" He was like, "Don't tell anybody about it until you're fully into production. You're ready to release it." He was like, "If they ain't on your team, don't discuss it with anybody." He was like, "You might have something on your hands here, so keep it to yourself. You know what I mean? Do it like that." And that was one of the real reasons that I was even able to launch. And I'll continue to say that. I've said that damn near every podcast I've been on, every time somebody asks me, because I want to, like you said, that community can really be a bonding factor.
Hmm.
And without Rob's words, I might not be here in this space at this moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's really important. And then that is that bonding element of what we do and how one word could change everything.
Yeah, because I remember there was like a clip circulating around Bernie Mac where he's basically talking
Mhm.
about, he's like, you don't want to tell your jokes in front of a bunch of comedians. You know, they'll sit there and
Mhm.
fucking chuckle and shit, be like, and then they're really fucking jotting that shit down to reverberate whatever message that you're
Right.
telling to the next audience and how they would describe it
Mhm. Mhm.
first.
It really is. It's one of those things where, and I ran into this real recently, where there's a piece of community where you want to help, and then like how much do you do? I have a certain piece of merch that it'll remain nameless, right?
Mhm.
That I got a lot of questions about recently. I also didn't get the sales from the people who were asking the questions. So what
Mhm.
does that tell me? You want to know because you want to reproduce this later on. Now
Mhm.
that I don't know if that means it's 6 months. I don't know if that means it's a year. I don't know if that means it's 2 years. But your interest is not in what I'm doing. Your interest is in how I produce what I'm doing, so
Right.
you can replicate that. And that's one of those dicey things, right? You've got to know who to trust and how to trust and what you talk about and what is giveaway. I don't personally so much worry about that, only because my arrogance kicks in then, right? Because I'm going to be like, well, you could do the same thing I do, but you're not going to do it as well.
Right.
There are a couple people who have tried to quote unquote steal my art team. And by that, I mean, they saw my art team, they used the exact same people, and then they were like, hey, color it just like you did Justice, right? Like, draw it just like you did Justice. I feel like that's not necessarily right, but it doesn't matter what they produce because it ain't Justice, right?
Yeah.
Like, you're never going to get what I got. And so like I said, the arrogance, the ambition kind of comes out at that point. So that's a comfort to me, because otherwise it can kind of crush you, right? If someone is doing all the things that you're doing and regurgitating what you're doing
Yeah.
while not like at least shouting you out or something,
Some.
it can get rough. It can
You
feel
bro.
rough, and you can
Yeah.
you can just fall into that. And, bro, that's just not me.
Yeah.
I'm not gonna fall into that. Like, I'm gonna do what I do.
Yeah, that's basic like imposter syndrome. Like you're feeling like, okay, I I've done a great thing here and I'm putting it out there to the world to see exactly what the reactions will be. And you're not necessarily seeing the reactions that you have or that you want.
Yeah, yeah. It can get rough, especially, I mean, look, this is like award season, you got all these things, and you do get again, you get people who want to talk about, these are the top 10 black indie, blah, blah, blah. And if you're left off that list, and you're like, man, shit, I know I'm selling, I know I'm writing, I know I'm publishing,
True.
at a high level. Again, a lot of these things that we need in order to forward the entire group
Hmm.
can be sometimes hurtful to the individual,
That's
right?
true.
And how we do these things is very, very important. So I try to conduct myself in a way to where I'm never under the gun. I'm never at the behest of anybody.
Word.
And again, that's again this move into manga is some of that, right? I want to be at the front of this pack. I got an idea, time to strike. Again, justice, and we talked about it before. People sometimes shy away because, oh man, is it religious? Is it this? Is it that? At our last convention, justice, the trade was the biggest seller. That trade, we couldn't keep it on the table, bro.
Hmm.
And sometimes it just takes people to see the full story in order for them to be like, oh damn, I wanted that the
Hmm.
whole time. And so I try to work with that mentality in mind of like, be the first to do the thing, right? If you got the idea, go for it. Don't sit on it.
Yeah.
And if you do sit on it, you should be sitting on it in planning, not just, oh, I'll do it some other time. No, you
Right.
got to be planning the steps so that when you have the availability, you're able to do it.
Hmm. Yeah, no doubt, man. Well, look, I appreciate you being with me doing this again. And I know you got a couple weeks left. So I can I'm already wishing you congratulations because you already hit your funding goal. So I can only imagine how
Appreciate you.
far this is
Appreciate you.
get. And you probably, for the most part, I'm looking at the tiers that you put out there. You're putting out elements out
Mm.
there as far as for purchase rights, toys, animation, shoes. You know what I'm saying? You're putting out
Yes.
shoes.
Yeah.
You're
Right.
actually putting out Air Force Ones. But I can see that this is going to be a real good campaign for you. I can see it being probably one of the biggest ones you ever had. So this is good.
So to be fair, this is
This
already
is.
the biggest campaign
Yeah.
we've had. Right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. 2 weeks with 2 weeks left to go, right? 2 weeks in, this is the largest campaign we've ever had. In my opinion, rightly so, and not just because I'm doing it. It's because of what it is, right? This campaign is not just a campaign, but it's a platform for what we're trying to build. We are trying to build merchandising. We are trying to build the infrastructure for action figures and all these other things.
Yep.
And again, go opening up, American comics are a thing. They're always going to be a thing. You could open yourself up to other audiences. I could have named this Air Force Ones, and I could have said it's a mech American comic, right? A robot American comic. A robot American comic is not going to sell as well as manga,
Mm-hmm.
period. The art is not going to be as stylized. Good. That's in the eye of the beholder. Stylized as a manga. So that is important to this. This is an entirely new kind of animal. Also, again, it being a volume is a little bit different. The page count is a little bit higher. They're just different things that I wanted to do with this. And like I said, I just want to expand how we tell stories, right? And again, if we're being cocky, arrogant, confident, ambitious, crazy, whatever we want to say, I wanted to make my stamp on something. I
Mm-hmm.
wanted to say, hey, in case y'all forgot, one, I never stopped making comics.
Right.
We've been successful every year, year upon year. We grow every year. And I want you guys to know, like, I'm not going anywhere, right? Like, the Wingless Comics started not out of tragedy, but it started out of not the best circumstances, right?
Mm-hmm.
I had to leave something in order to start something, which again has been beneficial for both parties.
Yeah.
So there's no hate or no love lost, right? Like it was one of those things that needed to happen, which is great. But there were a number of people, not that company, right? But there were a number of people who had estimated my demise
Yeah. It
in
wrote
three
you off.
months. He's never gonna do. And 4 years later, coming up on our 5th year anniversary next year, we're still here. And not only are we here, we're growing exponentially every time. I wanted to be able to do that. So then I can go back and say, there's that little petty part of me that's like, see, I told y'all, man, never, bet on yourself, right? You always got to bet on yourself because
Yeah.
nobody else is going to bet on you. They're going to bet on you after you're successful. Bet on yourself while you're not. And so this is me betting on myself, and I've continued to do that. And I'm gonna double down on it, and I'm gonna bet on my partners. I'm gonna bet on Brett, and I'm gonna bet on Malachi, and I'm gonna bet on Lawrence, and I'm gonna bet on Jay. Like all these guys, I'm gonna bet
Mhm.
on what we do because we're passionate, we love it, we study it, we live it, we breathe it. So all that other BS, it just ain't worth it.
Or, bro, amazing having you back, man. Thank you.
I appreciate it. I appreciate it every time, man. Like I said, best podcast out there. If y'all aren't subscribed, well, one, you better be subscribed because why are you listening if you're not? This man has knowledge of the material, cares about the material, cares about these creators. Also, I need y'all to follow him and support him and subscribe so that he will put out this damn comic. I'm telling you guys, I've read the script. You don't know what you're missing. I do. I literally know what you're missing, right?
Okay.
Like if I was a different
It's a
guy,
mini.
I would produce the art myself and send it to him to be like, just put this out. He's got a really great idea and some really great stuff, man. He's a really great guy. So again, thank you for always having me, man. Thank you for the great conversation and the camaraderie and the brotherhood, bro.
All the same, man. Thank you. So for James Green Master Facts Boys, Brian J. Lambert, Wingless Comics, Air Force One, still live on Kickstarter right now. Go out there and get that shit. Go get the biggest tier if you need to. All right. So for us at the Facts Project, we are out.